At the end of this video, I'm going to show you how to make the 8 phases of the moon using Oreo cookies. But first, let's review what's going on out there in space that's making the moon appear to change shape. Remember that the moon is revolving around the Earth, while the Earth is revolving around the sun. Our moon is a dry, dusty rock, so it doesn't make its own light. Instead, we see the moon in the night sky because the sun's light hits it, and then the moon reflects that light back to us. The moon is a sphere. So just like the Earth, the part of that sphere that's facing the sun is lit. And the part of that sphere that's facing away from the sun is dark. It takes 29.5 days for the moon to make one full revolution around the Earth. As our giant stick figure dude on Earth looks up into the night sky, the amount of that lighted part of the moon that he sees each night is changing. Let's take a closer look at the names of those moon phases. A new moon cycle begins with a new moon. This phase is a moon sandwich. The moon is sandwiched in between the Earth and the sun. Remember that the lighted part of the moon is always the part that faces the sun. So in this position, our giant stick figure dude on Earth can't see any of that lighted part of the moon. The moon looks completely dark. This phase lasts for 1 to 2 nights. The opposite of a new moon is a full moon. This phase is an Earth sandwich. The Earth is sandwiched in between the moon and the sun. Even though it might look like it, the Earth's shadow doesn't usually block the moon from being lit by the sun. This is because the moon's orbit is tilted 5 degrees from the Earth's orbit. In the full moon phase, giant stick figure dude will see all of the lighted part of the moon from Earth. This phase is seen for 1 to 2 nights. Each moon phase is named by its shape and whether the lighted part is getting bigger or smaller. For the first 2 weeks, as the moon changes from new to full, we see more and more of that lighted part of the moon each night. We call the moon waxing during this time. In the second half of the moon cycle, the lighted part of the moon gets smaller and smaller each night. We call the moon waning during this time as it changes from a full moon back to a new moon. In the northern hemisphere, the changes in the moon's shape always start on the right. So whether a moon is waxing or waning can be determined by looking on the right-hand side of the moon. I remember that wax is shiny. So a waxing moon will shine bright on the right. I remember that the word waning has an N in it, just like the word night has an N in it. So a waning moon will be night on the right. Besides waxing or waning, moon phases are also named by their shape. We call a moon a crescent when less than half of it is lit. In the waxing crescent phase, the moon starts as a tiny sliver. Over 6 to 7 nights, the moon waxes a little more each night, shining more and more bright on the right. In the waning crescent phase, the moon starts as a larger crescent and shrinks down to a little sliver over 7 to 8 nights, getting more and more night on the right. A half moon is when exactly half of the moon is lit. We only see this phase for 1 or 2 nights each time. The waxing half moon is shining bright on the right, while the waning half moon is night on the right. A waxing half moon is often called a first quarter because the moon is a quarter of its way around its orbit. A waning half moon is usually called a last quarter because there's only one quarter left until it completes its orbit. We call a moon a gibbous when more than half of it is lit. The waxing gibbous phase starts right after the first quarter, with more and more of it shining bright on the right until it reaches the full moon. The waning gibbous phase starts right after a full moon. The lighted part of the moon grows smaller as we see more and more night on the right, until it becomes a last quarter. As promised, now let's make those moon phases with Oreos. Pause this video after each phase to make it. Separate each Oreo, trying to keep the cream on one side. Use a butter knife to cut and remove parts of the cream filling for each phase. For the new moon phase, use a wafer with absolutely no cream filling. For the waxing crescent moon, you'll need less than half of the filling showing. The part with cream should be shining on the right. For a first quarter, try to get exactly half covered with cream. Since it's waxing, it should be shining bright on the right. The waxing gibbous is tricky. Just make sure that more than half, but not all of the cream is showing. Remember, for waxing, it's shining bright on the right. It might take a few tries, but for full moon, you'll need a wafer with all of the cream still attached. As the moon wanes, now your cookies should be night on the right. The waning gibbous should have more than half of the cream on it, and it should be missing a small part on the right. Your last quarter moon will have exactly half of the cookie covered with cream. Again, since the moon is waning, the wafer will be night on the right. Last one. For your waning crescent, less than half of the cream should be on your wafer. And again, since it's waning, it should be night on the right. Congratulations on making your moon phases. Take a photo of your creation and then celebrate by eating them.